Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this session of AZAPO's online political education. This session takes place a day before we commemorate the untimely assassination of Abraham Tiro. Tiro, like Biko Mohabi, represents the type of leaders that we are in need of in these trying times. Tiro embodied and continues to inspire courage, selflessness, and a deep commitment to his people and the cause of freedom. My name is Thabiso Ngoni, a guest host for this session, which will explore COVID-19 pandemic and the burden of politics. Today, we are fortunate to have Professor Comrade Monde Ntwasa, a returning guest to this platform. People will remember last year in August, he gave an excellent and quite in-depth presentation on COVID-19 and the politics around that disease. We will definitely share the link on YouTube in the description below, and all the social media platforms will share the link to that first presentation. Professor Monde Ntwasa is the son of AZAPO, a long-standing Black consciousness activist. His expertise are in biochemistry, bioinformatics, developmental biology, drug discovery, innate immunity, and molecular basis of cancer, amongst other things. Comrade Monde, welcome, and thank you for coming through for the second time so that you can share with us some of your knowledge. A lot has happened between August and now, so I quite look forward to getting an update from you, and then the interaction that will follow. I will then hand over to you, Comrade Monde.
Okay. Good afternoon, comrades. Don't know how many people are here today. Again, I should like to thank you, Comrade Tibos, for the invitation. Again, to come and talk about what we call the COVID issues. And I remember we had a heated conversation with Comrade Tabo on Friday about the purpose of these seminars, because from my even early days in AZAPO, I always hated meetings which were not consequential, which were not going to lead anywhere. So that was my point last week, that I think that we should not be engaged in talk shops. We should be engaged in things that have got consequences. So when we have workshops like this one, there should be an agenda to do something about what is discussed in the workshop. And I mentioned to him that the last workshop that we had, it was clear to me that there was no agenda to do anything about what we were doing. It was just a talk shop, because I didn't see any of the leadership of the organization that were there who would be the people who facilitate the actual implementation of AZAPO's intervention in this thing. So in other words, I'm saying that if AZAPO is having these seminars, but is not planning to intervene, then I think we are falling short in terms of our mandate to liberate our people. Because I'm going to basically say in this, in today's talk, that the COVID pandemic is important, not in terms of how many Black people die, but in terms of what the future of Black people is going to be. And that should be our concern. And if AZAPO is about liberation of our people, then it's important that AZAPO does something about the legacy of the pandemic. So I planned to have a short talk today and then leave the rest for discussion. I think I've got only about 10 slides or so, can't remember. So we're just going to talk briefly. I'll just make brief comments about the politics of the pandemic, and then I will talk about vaccine production and vaccination. And that will really be just for the sake of us understanding the context in which things are happening currently. And then we talk about the legacy of the pandemic. I, I hope we can remember, or we can appreciate that actually the reason this is an infectious virus like other viruses such as the flu, the HIV, and so on and so on. But what makes it a problematic pandemic is its transmissibility, as well as the lack of a therapeutic agent. If it was possible, if there was a drug to deal with this virus, there would be no concern about its pandemic nature, really, because it would be controlled. Maybe some measures would be taken because of the transmissibility, to curb movement of people somewhat in less restrictions than now. If there was treatment for it, there would be no need for all these restrictions that people are having. There are restrictions now because it is spreading too fast compared to other viruses of the same. It is in the same family as the flu virus, coronavirus. Flu virus is also a coronavirus in the same family. But this one is twice as transmissible as the flu virus. And secondly, there is no known drug that can treat it. So that is what makes it really a pandemic. And the other thing is that this virus has had a seriously adverse impact on humanity. And that impact has been worsened by the involvement of politicians. Because in various settings globally, politicians have used the pandemic for their own ends. Although they all say they're about what's called protecting the people. But in many cases, the pandemic has been used by politicians for selfish reasons as well. In South Africa, this pandemic has exposed the vulnerability of Black people. When the pandemic started in South Africa, the first community spread of it was in Alexandra, and then immediately Khayelitsha. And this was even before the lockdown restrictions were introduced, the first ones. And my greatest fear when I heard that was, okay, this is a highly transmissible virus. It's starting in a very, what call difficult place, Alexandra, and now in Khayelitsha soon after that, because that was the community spread, really, because everybody knows that the virus was introduced here by travelers from other countries. And people in Khayelitsha, obviously, and in Alexandra, would have contact with such people through their jobs. So, and then you would imagine a highly transmissible virus in densely population places like those. But strangely, those things do not make sense now, because people tell you anecdotally that you hardly find coronavirus infections in Khayelitsha. I never heard of people falling dead on the streets in Alexandra as well. And therefore one should ask the question, which are not going to be asked by other scientists. Our scientists, the Black scientists, should be asking the question, why? Nobody is really investigating the fact that the first community spread were in these areas, but hardly any research is asking that question. Why are people in Khayelitsha and in Alexandra not dying like flies when the pandemic started there? Similarly, if you go to the rural areas, I come from the Eastern Cape. I was there last week to bury my mother's sister. It's in the rural area. And the preacher there was talking about that they in the more formal environment in rural areas, people go to church and stuff like that, they are dying. But just next to the small town of Willowvale, there is a squatter camp there, and no one is dying of COVID. All the funerals are happening in the more formal settlements. And but those questions are not asked because science is not geared at those people. You see, so people are asking questions that are geared at because science is about the wisdom of people, but the wisdom of people is people who matter, and people who matter are people who are not Black people in South Africa. The vulnerability of Black people was exposed by this. Poor infrastructure is definitely one of the reasons why people are dying from COVID. If you look at the Eastern Cape has got double the number of people who die. The rate of people who die in the Eastern Cape is double that of Gauteng. And you ask why. The reason is that there is no infrastructure in the Eastern Cape. You know how they tried to mitigate for the problem of poor ambulances, and they brought trolleys that they called ambulances, which they eventually abandoned. Because a lot of people in the Eastern Cape died before they even go to the hospital for other things other than COVID, first of all. And when people have COVID, usually people transport their people by themselves in their own cars. As a result, COVID wipes out entire families because the same people share the same car going to hospital. There are no ambulances. So people are dying there then when they should not be dying if they were cared for. So, and I feel that those are things that we in AZAPO should be dealing with. Similarly, in the Western Cape, the death rate in the Western Cape is the same as that of the Eastern Cape. And you wonder why in the Western Cape that is the case, because the Western Cape is well resourced. Apparently, that's how it seems. But no one who's asking who is dying in the Western Cape, because how come there's so many people dying in the Western Cape, really? When they've got so much good infrastructure, they're supposed to have good infrastructure. Why are they the same as the what you call the Eastern Cape? The rest of the country has got about 2% death rate. Those two provinces have got 4% death rate. So that should be the question that we should be asking as the organization, because those two cases show the failure of politics and how that failure puts our people at great risk. So it is a miracle that people are not dying. Really, it is a miracle that people are that, in spite of the politics that is putting our people in environment in what called in vulnerable situation, is in spite of that, our people still survive. Is it just a miracle? We should be asking, but it looks miraculous at the moment because no one is investigating it. Again, the thing is about the pandemic. It's like I said last time, it's not really about the health of people, because globally, only about 1 to 2% of people are dying. The majority of people recover from COVID, especially here in South Africa. Maybe in Europe, there are more people that are dying than here in terms of death rates. But what the pandemic has done is to change the economic arrangements globally. And in our country, we know that that has happened. And this pandemic is going to leave only established and big businesses to survive. And small businesses are not going to survive. And that means employment is going to be really, really low. And as we know, the majority of our people are insecurely employed by the private sector mostly, and in insecure jobs where they can be sacked anyway. So this is another vulnerability point for Black people, the insecure employment. And as a result, families have lost their jobs. And I do not need to say what the consequences of that are. The marginalization of people in the legal system, that is also what we call been exposed by this. And one good example of that marginalization is what happened last week, where Zwelim Kiza's, what I can't remember who the person that died last week, who was buried.
Jackson Temple.
Jackson Temple. Jackson Temple was buried normally, like everybody else. Whereas for the whole year, people have been asked not to even see their loved ones. And some people have buried wrong people and they've had to exhume people, because it was said that if you bring the coffin unwrapped or whatever, even if you bring it into the what called the house, you're all going to die from COVID. But in this case, that was not the case in the case of Jackson Temple. And soon after that, it was said that, no, actually, that was wrong. It was never the case. That you can't be infected by a coffin. If someone's enclosed in a coffin, and this is something that is just logic, really. It should not have required any investigation or anything. No virus can, if you don't open the coffin, the virus is not going to escape from a sealed coffin and infect people who are there. Everybody that dies has got what we call putrefaction, and all organisms get out of the body. That is why bodies that are embalmed have to be treated, with formalin in order to kill everything. So in the case of COVID, what makes it different from the others? There's nothing that makes a difference. No virus can escape an enclosed coffin. Yes, maybe if you open the coffin and touch the body, then there's a problem. But a lot of Black people have undergone serious, what we call emotional torture this year because of the legal system, which does not even consult them, which does not listen to them, which does not care for them. So all those things are things that organizations like ours, I think, should be looking at. Now, the other thing is that the robustness of the economic structure under the monopoly of white people in South Africa. Oh, now this thing is, I can't see it properly. My own screen.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, so the other thing that comes out is that our economy is really quite robust, surprisingly so. But it's robust only when it comes to what is controlled by white people. If you look at the corruption, the level of corruption, the level of capture of state structures, especially the SOEs and all those things, but South Africa still looks like a normal country. I mean, there's a lot of money that's been embezzled here. It's unbelievable. It's almost like we had a bottomless, pit really full of money here. But things generally still run here properly. But the thing is, all the things that survive, the infrastructure that is robust and strong is the infrastructure that white people own. Whatever Black people own is going to crumble. So we're going to have a country that where the middle class is going to take backward step. Because even those BE people, if they were on their own, they are going to crumble. I never support BE stuff because I think it was actually treachery in terms of our liberation agenda. But even those people, I think, are going to be in trouble. They're going to depend on the backbone, which is going to be the white business. And these are things, again, I think that we as a Black conscious movement should be looking at. The other thing that has been exposed is just how weak leadership is here, how weak what called state structures are. There's not one thing that works here in terms of the leadership and the state. Look at the police system. If you look at the problems that are caused by illegal immigration and the marginalization of the working class, all those things, the Black working class in South Africa is definitely marginalized. Nothing works. The trade unions are just puppets, basically. We have no effect. Nothing really works. It's a country in self-drive. And unfortunately, there is no leadership anywhere in political organizations, in civil society, even the churches do not have the what call the backbone to challenge the injustice that is happening here. I'm not talking about the revolutionary intelligentsia. It's gone, it's finished, it's extinct. So we are in a serious position as a nation as far as I'm concerned. So I've already talked about this. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that catastrophes of this nature provide opportunities to the powerful to do what they've always wanted to do, to control society. And I would recommend people who have got time to read a book by Naomi Klein, K-L-I-E-N, that says, what's the name of the book now? I will remember now. It's a book by Naomi Klein. It basically talks about how the West, particularly the Americans, how they use catastrophes such as the pandemic to quickly do what they've always wanted to do, but had no guts to put it and could not justify it. And then they do it during a catastrophe when people will accept anything that comes as a solution. It's a pity. I mean, I will probably send the name of the book to Comrade Tabo by email later, or by SMS, by WhatsApp. So I think that political organizations should particularly throw a keen eye on things like this, and not be swept in the media sensationalism of a number of people dying and so on and so on and so on, and look exactly what are the agendas of politicians during this time. And for us as Africans particularly, or Black people around the world, it will be a big mistake to continue depending on the goodwill of the people who are powerful. The fact of the matter is that there's not a single place on earth where a Black person can claim that they are truly free, that they cannot defend, they do not have to defend their humanity all the time. There's not one place on earth that anyone can identify to me. And that alone should tell us something. That why is it that the case? And to think that there are people who are not Black, whose primary interest is to preserve us, then I think we'll be making a big mistake if we do that. That is the brief comment I was going to make. And it was not as brief as I thought it was going to be before. But let me quickly go through this one. So now I'm going to talk about the main things about the vaccine issue. First of all, the first confirmed case of this was in December, on the 7th of December, 2019. So it was the end of 19. And the first sequence, in other words, the complete genetic makeup of the virus was completed, being analyzed on the 5th of January. So by the 5th of January, 2020, everything that needed to be known in terms of the genetic makeup of the virus was known, and it was published by various laboratories, in fact, around the world. And And then by the 25th of January, it was clear that the virus was responsible for the infectious situations that were happening in China. So the Chinese started responding on the 25th of January. But quickly, by the 4th of February, people were already accepting people in hospitals. The rest is history. In South Africa, I think it was the 4th of March or something, that the lockdown was declared. So now I'm mentioning this because the most important part here is what happened on the 5th of January, because the determination of the genetic structure of the virus was the key to the production of the vaccine. Now, vaccines come in different forms. We covered this last time in great detail. These are the traditional vaccines, the inactivated or weakened viruses. That's what has been used over many years before. These have got some disadvantages, obviously, because you're dealing with the same virus, and you weaken it, and you hope you have inactivated, you hope you have weakened it. If you have not done that completely, and then the virus wakes up, then you have a problem. And then there are protein-based vaccines where you make a recombinant protein. You make a protein of the virus in the lab, and then you grow that, and then you inject it into a person. Then there are also vaccines that are carried by viral vectors. So you take a viral vector that is believed not to be dangerous to a human being, and you insert in that vector a protein or a gene from the infectious virus, and then you inject that construct into a patient. This type is the same virus that is used, that comes from Oxford. That virus is based on a vector, which is a viral vector taken from a chimpanzee. And they've inserted a gene from the coronavirus into that vector, which has also been inactivated so that it does not multiply if it's injected into a human being. That is the Oxford vaccine. The other vaccine, which is other types of vaccine, are nucleic acid vaccines, RNA or DNA. RNA virus is the example of that is the AstraZeneca one, the BioNTech, the one I think is going to be given to South Africans. That one is not carried by a vaccine, so it's a messenger RNA that's taken from, it's actually synthesized, based on the sequence that we talked about. So they looked at the sequence of the virus, which was determined in 2015, and synthesized that sequence, but only for a specific gene, the gene that caused those spikes outside the virus. We call the spike proteins. So they took that gene and synthesized it, and then in the form of messenger RNA, synthetic messenger RNA, basically, which will encode that spike protein when it gets into a cell. So that vaccine is embedded in lipid particles and then injected into a patient with the hope that it's going to enter immune cells in the patient, and then those immune cells will then use that the vaccine to produce the spike protein of the virus, and that protein will then be released into this into the system, and then your body will think that you're being attacked by the virus, and then kill the virus if you get infected. So we've got here two types of viruses: the Oxford one and the Astra. Those are the two that have been what we call approved at the moment. So the virus, the discovery process of all vaccines, of all drugs, a virus is a drug, basically. It's, like for classifications purposes, it is a drug, and it goes through the same process as other drugs for its production. So all drugs start with the validation of a target. So you need to know, first of all, what the target is of the drug. In this case, the sequencing on the 5th of January was important because that's when the identification of the target was, and then it was validated. So that's where it starts. So in this case, you know, in normal circumstances, target validation can take anything up to, you know, 3 years or more, you know, depending on whoever is researching on it. So in this case, it was okay because quickly by January, this was known, a target was identified. And then preclinical stages start. Preclinical stages is where you conduct experiments in animals. So you inject the animal with the pathogen and then treat it. Or you can treat it. In this case, you would first of all treat with the animal with the virus and see if it's going to develop the symptoms of the disease. And then if it does, then you know that this is the causative agent of that disease. And of course, now if you then inject a vaccine on the animal, and the animal does not catch the disease, then you know that the vaccine is probably good for development of a vaccine. So those preclinical stages under normal circumstances can take anything up to 8 years, including target validation. And of course, this time that was done in just about a month or two, basically, by most companies, because most companies by April, they had already done the preclinical stages. In the case of a vaccine, then you need the manufacturing. Manufacturing a vaccine is very tricky and difficult, and you need, especially for mass production, you require you know, extensive technology and capacity. And that is why the Russians were able to do it quickly, because they already had a huge infrastructure from previous vaccine development, and the Russians used the same technology as the Oxford people. So that's one of the advantage. A lot of countries would have difficulty already at this early manufacturing stage. There's another manufacturing stage right at the end of the process, which is even worse because it's a large-scale production. So people like Abondlozi will say we can just copy. They're talking nonsense, really, because not everybody can. First of all, you cannot just take a bottle and copy it and then produce a vaccine. So he was just talking rubbish. So manufacturing of these is the next process, which is also depending on what you've got. And that is followed by phase 1, clinical. Clinical means clinical trial. Clinical, of course, means that it's now applied to humans. So phase 1 clinical trial basically is to test the safety of the vaccine. Now, in terms of drug discovery, safety means basically that whatever you introduce into the human being is not toxic. You test that it is not toxic. Whether it's doing what it's supposed to do or not, it does not matter at this stage. You just want to know that when you introduce this, the people do not have serious adverse effect, which could lead to fatality or serious health pathologies. So the phase 1 clinical trials, also they're quite long. They can take maybe a small group of people, like 10 people or so. And then you move to phase 2 clinical trials. Here you're checking, in the case of a virus, of a vaccine, immunogenicity, but obviously, as well as safety. But obviously in other drugs, you don't take immunogenicity because you're testing on something else. But in the case of a vaccine, you're taking immunogenicity. In other words, when you introduce this vaccine, does it give immunity? Does it make the patient produce antibodies against that vaccine. So this time you're not even worried about whether those antibodies actually are effective and they kill. You just want to know that it is immunogenic. It can stimulate the production of antibodies, as well, of course, as safety. That all the time you always check safety, because you don't want serious adverse effects. You may have not seen safety problems in the first one because you only use 10 people. Now you're using 100 people in the second clinical phases. So you still need to observe safety. And of course, in many cases, you find that people have got different reactions, and you know, some people nothing happens, but other people have got serious side effects. In the third clinical trials, that's where you now need thousands and thousands of people to use. Here, you're not testing safety only, but you are testing efficacy as well. Efficacy in drug discovery is very important. What efficacy means is that the agent that you are introducing to the patient is doing what you want it to do only, and nothing else. In other words, if you want a drug, you use a lotion to smear on a pimple which has been infected. The lotion is going to kill only that bacteria that is there and do nothing to the cells, you know, because when you smear it on your skin, you know, you're not smearing only the pimple, you're also smearing the what you call the nearby skin, the adjacent normal skin. So the agent must only kill the bacteria and other things. That is what efficacy is. It is doing what it is meant to do and nothing else. So this is the critical part in terms of drug discovery, then the efficacy, that the drug you're introducing is only killing the virus and it's not doing anything else to them. Now, this happens, initially what happens is that this will take about 2 years. During that 2 years of these thousands of people, it will be checked that there are no serious adverse effects, short-term as well as long-term. And after 2 years, then it will go to the regulatory system. It gets regulated, which can take shorter. And then after that, it goes for mass production. And then it's released into the community. In many drugs, there's also the post, what call sale, what we call observation, where for another 4 years, even though it's being applied to patients, you know, generally, there is also a study to show that those patients do not suffer. Then because you can have very long-term effects on a drug, and you get, you know, okay now, but then 5 years later, you find that you've got another condition, which is not what you had before, but is actually caused by that drug. So this, the phase 3 is very, very important. So it usually is extended for a long time. Now you can see that the entire period from the time you identify your target to the time you finish phase 3 clinical trials, you basically spend almost 15 years. That is what traditional vaccine development is, 15 years. Okay, so the two vaccines that we've got now, this one, the AstraZeneca one, that's Oxford one, sorry, the AstraZeneca is Oxford one. That is the one that's based on the vector, that's CHAdO, that's the adenovirus vector in which it is carried. So they've inserted a COVID gene into that inactivated virus from a chimpanzee, and that's what is going to be injected on people. And the Moderna one, which I think is the one that's coming to us, is the one that's based on mRNA. So those are the approved vaccines. The Russian one is similar to that one. The Chinese one is also vector-based. The Moderna virus is the only one that is new. that is not what we call based on vaccines, and this has never been done before. So there are some important things that maybe people can consider in terms of the mRNA virus, because I'm going to talk about that one, because it's a completely new technology. It has never been used. There's not a single vaccine that's ever been licensed that is based on this technology. It's completely new. The other virus, the Oxford and Russian Chinese ones, those ones based on virus, they have been done before, and they've been observed for long periods to see, their side effects and everything. So it's technology that is older than this one, the mRNA vaccine one. The advantages of the mRNA vaccine is that you are introducing into the patient an agent, basically a chemical, a nucleic acid, into the and it is not infectious, and it does not integrate into the genome of the host cell. So, which is a significant difference from the other ones that are based on vectors, because the vector still is a virus. It's just an inactivated virus. So its infectivity cannot be guaranteed. And also that the mRNA that you put there is only the viral mRNA. So the only thing you're putting there in terms of the vaccine is just the viral thing, unlike the other ones, because there you're putting both the coronavirus genetic entity as well as another virus. And the problem with that is that the vector virus will also stimulate immunity. And that immunity may be detrimental, because some people may already have anti-adenoviral antibodies, and they may have a bad reaction to that. So this one is better in that the only thing you've got here is the viral genetic, and it's the coronavirus only, there's nothing else. And the other advantage is that because this messenger RNA is highly unstable, it's just been modified slightly to be made stable enough to produce the protein there. So it will be degraded very quickly by physiological means in your body after maybe it's produced the protein. And also that it can, it is likely to produce more antibodies than the virus-based, the vector-based, vaccines. And of course, once it's been shown that it makes the correct antibodies, it's efficacious and everything. Now in the factory, this technology would facilitate large-scale production much higher than the other viruses. So this is the advantage of the Moderna virus, that more of it can be made quicker than the other ones, like the Oxford. The disadvantages of this virus, of this one, is that there is no history. It's not known. It's new technology. It's completely unknown what it can do in the long term. And both of these vaccines are emergency vaccines, basically. As you have seen, nobody can claim they know the efficacy, the long-term safety of both viruses, of both vaccines. No one, even the producers, nobody can claim that they know the safety and efficacy in the long term. Everything that is known about the safety and efficacy of this virus is less than a year, and much less than what it should be normally. The other thing is that this virus is known to be even more glycosylated than the HIV virus. Glycosylation basically means that in addition to the proteins that the virus and the lipids that it have on its envelope, there are also carbohydrate moieties, and these carbohydrate moieties that on the virus, on the side, on the surface of the virus, apparently the virus is used to evade the immune system. And some people claim that is probably the reason why there is no working antibody against HIV, no vaccination against HIV, because HIV is 3 times as more glycosylated than the flu virus. But CoV-2 apparently is twice as more glycosylated as HIV, but they've had antibodies to it. So it's not clear, but it is known to be highly glycosylated, and therefore the virus may evade the immune system, and the vaccines may not be effective in this case. So I'm going to end there and open for discussion. I think I've given what's called the background to the virus, to ask questions about what people should think now, where we are. This is where we are.
Yeah, this is where we are. No,
thank you, comrade, for listening.
No, thank you for that, comrade Monde. Could the book you were thinking about be Battle for Paradise?
Shock Doctrine. It's called Shock Doctrine.
Okay.
Yeah, it was very hard to find in South Africa. It was sold in most stores, but I think for us, it will be very good to read that book, because it's written by someone who was a journalist, someone who understood the American system and the cabals around the world, what they were doing, how they exploited catastrophes from famines to sometimes they initiate what we call foment violence and start wars in order to create space for themselves to loot and stuff like that. So I think it's an important book to read in order to understand how vulnerable we are actually as Black people around the world.
Excellent.
Although I mean, it's not necessarily targeted at us alone, but we are the problems, really.
Yeah. No, excellent. So, comrade, have a reference there to go and view. Comrade Monde, you made, I think, a perfect point where you are showing essentially the confluence between politics, economics, and the social aspects of life of Black people in South Africa. You know, some people have observed that COVID, the coronavirus, was brought to South Africa by middle class and wealthy people. But
I can stop the share now.
Yes, please. Yeah, you can stop the share. So as I was saying, people have made the comment and the observation that the coronavirus was brought to South Africa by the affluent, those who can afford to travel overseas and so on.
Yes, of course.
But the people who are going to be affected the most are the poor who do not have a health care and so forth, and have to endure essentially a healthcare system that has been crumbling for years. So those are the people who basically endure the brunt of this. And the fact that you are saying that the established businesses will basically survive this. It is those small businesses that will bear the brunt, and the unemployment will affect mostly Black people and the poor. So,
and if I may just add to what you have just said, because I think it's important. The problem again with our leadership here is that they refuse to think independently. So everything is dependent on the affluent, who are not our leaders, because our leaders, in spite of what they might think, they cannot be classified as affluent, because they can't be affluent alone, and their community is poor.
Yeah.
So if you look at, for instance, what happened in December, around November, the government announced that there was a spike in Port Elizabeth. Then they blamed the locals of Port Elizabeth, saying that they have now forgotten the rules about COVID, and now they are they're breaking the rules, and that's why the infections were increasing. But this did not make sense at all, because these are people who lived with the virus for almost 9 months by now. Why would in November suddenly they start, being accused of not following the rules? But the clear thing is that the Eastern Cape, I mean, what called Port Elizabeth is a coastal city, very popular with Europeans, especially the British, especially also because of its name, Port Elizabeth, which maybe should be changed as well. So they like a lot Port Elizabeth, the British. The government had just opened borders, including people from Britain, to come to South Africa. Obviously, these people would come to South Africa to go to the coastal areas. And it was not therefore surprising that there would be the spike would start in coastal areas, because even people inland who are rich have got houses in the coastal areas. They went on holiday earlier this year because everybody can work from home. So it was clear it was not the locals, and the locals would be affected because the places that were affected were places like Motherwell in the township. And so, but these are the people actually who service these travelers, in hotels and stuff like that. So like you're saying, it comes with them, but it ends up with us. You see what I mean? But our government was not able to see this even when it was clear, because from Port Elizabeth there, it went to Knysna, to George, and eventually to Cape Town, and then to the eastern, to KwaZulu-Natal. It was clearly a migration of people going on holiday, but they were blaming the locals. You see what I mean? So, that kind of what you call sleepy thinking, it's something that we are cursed with, as a people, that we just don't have leaders who are not going to be engineered by the media. They're going to think on based on what the media is driving them to think, on propaganda. They're just geared into the propaganda, a mode of things.
Yeah. No, excellent. I already have a few hands of people who want to ask questions. Just before I allow them, you highlighted a paradox that the expectation was that once the virus enters townships where most Black people, poor people live, it was going to go rampant. But you say it has not been the fire. I remember the analogy of the fire was used previously. It has not been the fire that everyone expected. And you say some of our researchers are not looking into that. Could you maybe theorize as to why are people not investigating that, particularly people who have their origins in those communities? Why aren't they? What could be the structural issues that are affecting that type of research?
Well, I mean, there are two things. First of all, research is controlled by funders that we cannot run away from. What people conduct research is what can be funded. And the people who fund, I don't need to tell you, there's no Black person who funds what called research of any sort. All research is funded by white people all around the world. So, and then secondly, of course, the other people who could fund research is the government. But the government acts on advice that is given by scientists. Who gives advice to our governments is white people. So questions that pertain to our problems of Black people are not going to be asked because no one is willing to fund. I cannot just go and research, even though I see this is an important question. I can't go because to do research, you would need a lot of money. Because first of all, just going through the ethics, just getting an ethics clearance to do that research, that alone involves money. So you can't even do it from a personal pocket. You see what I mean? So you can ask questions, but to answer those questions is too expensive or just unattainable. So that's one of the reasons that the power structure around knowledge productions is dominated by white people throughout the world. Even it's not just South Africa, throughout the continent. Last year, we had a very good opportunity to meet in Kenya, 25 countries from Africa. This is a project that is spearheaded by South Africa, basically to fund research throughout the continent, a very good project. And so 25 countries met in Kenya, and it was so beautiful. People were crying, because it was the first time anybody saw so many African scientists under one roof. Not a single white, the only white person was there was someone from the NRF, was an official of the NRF in South Africa. But it was just Black scientists, and people realized just how all of the people were there. They collaborate, not with one another, but they all collaborate with Europeans, with Americans, whatever. Nobody could. And, you know, it became so clear that we're in the same continent, but we don't talk amongst one another. And when we realize now, when we talk about it, how important it would be if actually we focused on collaborating amongst ourselves rather than collaborating with the rest of the world. But unfortunately, the people who fund research in Africa and in South Africa are mostly people, you know, or either white people in South Africa or people in the rest of the Western world.
Let me take questions. I will start with Comrade Mangena. Comrade Mangena, you have the floor. Comrade Mangena, if you could unmute, you could ask the question.
Is that Comrade Mangena the one I know?
It seems like it. I think so, yes.
Seems like it. I think he's challenged by technology.
I do not know. Okay, let me try Joel so long. We will come back to you, Comrade Mangena.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Prof Monde, for the analysis. You have actually answered one of my questions where I was going to pose something like, why is it that, you know, Ebola, which was actually discovered around 1976 and has killed a lot of people, but there are a few reports to state exactly how many people have actually died as a result of Ebola, which was actually discovered in the DRC. Now, looking at COVID-19, which is actually in the same family group as Ebola, why is it that scientists have actually failed to develop a vaccine for Ebola, yet within a short space of time, COVID-19 vaccines are already there? You know, everyone is talking about, you know, South Africa is getting the first batch, I mean, tomorrow or maybe next week or whatever it is. But you have actually addressed my question through the statement where you said funding is a big issue. In a way, what it basically means is that when something or when a virus is actually affecting our colleagues from the white community, it's easier and it's faster for them to look at something that, I mean, to look at vaccines that can actually ameliorate the situation. So that goes back again to the situation where we have HIV/AIDS, which, you know, wreaked havoc around the 1990s, even up to now, is still killing people. There isn't, you know, true vaccination that is there. Of course, there's some medication that is there. There are some processes that are out there. There's some procedures that are being followed out there. But because these viruses, they're killing, I'm talking about Ebola, I'm talking about HIV/AIDS, they're killing en masse, you know, Black people. So there's little research that is actually being done in that aspect. Then, therefore, my question then comes to,
yes, please.
These vaccines that are being rolled out, maybe South Africa is getting its first batch maybe tomorrow. Would it not be ideal that these vaccines are tested on politicians so that we see the effects? We see the effects, because you know, the general populace, at the end of the day, they are on the receiving end because they don't have access to certain, you know, complex medical facilities, systems, medication, and that kind of stuff. Why can't we have our politicians be the first guinea pigs to take these vaccines? And then we, us as South Africa, we can then, you know, ascertain whether these vaccines are really effective, because there are theories that are coming out there. Some are saying it's mark of the beast. Some are saying these vaccines are this and that. I mean, no one has actually got the true version of what exactly is happening with this, with this.
Well, I'm going to ask you to conclude now.
So what I mean, yeah, that is my comment, Prof Monde.
Excellent. Thank you, Joel.
Okay. Shall I go ahead?
Yes, please go ahead.
Thanks, Comrade Joe, for the comments. I will also just briefly, I would comment back on the thing about the vaccines that have not the Ebola vaccine. Eventually, the Ebola vaccine, if you remember, was developed. I think about 2-3 years ago. It got developed because the Ebola infected American medical workers who worked in the DRC, and then they returned to California and other parts of America, and then there was fear of the vaccine, and soon after that, the vaccine was developed. So I think that the Ebola vaccine development shows clearly how research is accelerated by interests, because I mean, the Ebola had been there for many years, no vaccine was coming up, but as soon as the Americans got infected and it spread to their country, then the vaccine was discovered. So it's really about, and there are many cases like that in Africa. A lot of there's some diseases, many diseases in Africa, which are called neglected diseases. In other words, diseases no one wants to fund. And that is largely because those diseases affect us Africans only, and the world is interested in malaria, for instance, because they know malaria affects tourists as well. So it's not, even though it's mostly in Africa, but it affects them because they want to come to our continent. So, and those diseases, actually, there are special campaigns to fund what is called neglected diseases. Research and production of drugs depends on who wants to spend money on them. Unfortunately, that is just the game of things. Now, coming to the question of whether we should test these viruses should be tested on politicians. What I'd like to point out, I mean, I don't mind. I'm sorry, Comrade Mangena is here also. He used to be in the government. But I don't really mind if you test on them. But I don't think that would help. I think because at the end of the day, and individuals must make decisions about these vaccines. Like I said earlier, the one thing that you can be sure is that nobody knows about the long-term effects of the drugs, because that has never been tested. That one we're definitely sure. So you're taking risks knowing that the long-term effects of the vaccine is unknown, even by the people who produce them. That one we are sure, because only short-term observations have been made, right? And the other thing is that you see, what is the I wanted to say now about these vaccines is well, before I've just forgotten that. The other thing that's important is that really the problem with the vaccination, mass vaccination, because this is global mass vaccination. The problem with the mass vaccination is not necessarily the trusting the the virus or not, because we should have the same safety concerns, whoever you are, about the vaccines, basically, because so much about them is not known. So everybody is taking a risk when they are taking it. Oh yeah, the other point I was going to make in terms of including the problem of the not knowing the long term. The other thing that is not known is what it will do on specific groups of people. Because there were so many exclusions. When you do clinical trials, of course, there are exclusions. Let's say, for instance, you can say, in this particular study, we can't include pregnant people. We can't include people over the age of so much. We can't include younger people. We can't include infants. So, I mean, so all clinical trials need to have inclusions and exclusions. And in this case, there were many people who were excluded, including those people who've got allergies. If you know, the other thing I forgot to mention about the politics, the burden of politics on this vaccine thing earlier, was the use of the media to engineer the thinking of societies, of people. The media is used quite robustly by those people who want to do this to promote their agenda, whatever agenda they have on around the vaccine. They use the media, and in the case of this vaccine, I think it's the Moderna vaccine, which was applied in America, and more than about 28 patients who took it developed paralysis in the face and very, very serious effects. But the Western media covered that up until the Chinese forced them. The Chinese said, because they were, and the Russians, they were always criticizing the Chinese and the Russian, whatever. But when it came to the catastrophe that happened in California, which led to the Californians saying that the vaccine must be suspended, I'm sure many people have not heard about what I'm talking about now, but it is there. If you check in the media, you have to dig for it in order to see it. But it was the Chinese who forced them, even going as far as the World Health Organization, to reveal that their vaccine has had these what you call failures. So the point I'm making is that it's not that the vaccination itself is a problem for us as non-politicians or as Black people. What we need to realize is that vaccination provides access to you. I don't know if you understand what I'm talking about. The importance of vaccination is not the vaccine itself that's in the tube. The importance of vaccination is that vaccination provides access to yourself. You know very well how some of the things that do not get investigated in South Africa, how Votabason and other bogus structures, for instance, use vaccination to introduce HIV to South Africans. So vaccination is a problem. The vaccine may not be the problem, but vaccination is a problem. I hope you understand that. So we should worry about the vaccines just like everybody else is worried, but we should be even more worried about vaccination.
That's a distinction we would need to explore a bit. Comrade Mangena, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I would have expected you to say Mangena. You and Monde there. Anybody that
we all have different accents, Comrade Mangena.
I was clicking the button, but it was not in order to unmute myself. It was not responding. Okay. But now it has done. No, thanks for the input. And as you rightly say, you know, there is nothing that is free of politics on earth. Whether it's education, whether it's health, or it's land redistribution, whatever it is, it relies on the color and the complexion of the politics you have. So because we have the kind of politics we have, even with this pandemic, we cannot escape the kind of politics we have got. But I've got three quick questions. The first is whether you've got a comment on the controversy about ivermectin being used to treat COVID-19 patients. The controversy is raging on, and I'm just wondering whether you have an opinion on it. The second one is that I've got a book about to be published. And amongst other things, I assume that Black people are going to die disproportionately from COVID-19 in our country than anywhere else.
and also taking cue from the fact that in the UK and in the US, Black people die disproportionately from COVID-19 than other population groups. And since the preparation of the manuscript, I've tried to find information from the Department of Health, whether this is in fact the case. But they keep on saying that they do not have disaggregated statistics to show how many Africans, how many Indians, how many colors, how many whites are dying from COVID-19. And I had assumed, because more or less our circumstances are the same with those of Blacks elsewhere in the world. And as you say somewhere else, that the burden of Black people all over the world is the same. So we have got a burden of disease such as hypertension, diabetes, asthma, TB, and what have you, malnutrition, lack of sanitation, water. We live on top of one another in Alexander and Diepsloot and Khayelitsha that you have mentioned. Whether you have any better information than I have. If not, then the book is going to be published with those assumptions. And I still believe that probably the assumptions are the same and they will not be challenged. I know that in as far as the rest of the continent is concerned, some people have said it is because of the level of urbanization, and that the virus is not able to move as quickly on the continent that is beyond South Africa as it does elsewhere because of the mobility of people in those countries. So that's the second question. The third one is whether you have got any recommendation to make. You know, tomorrow the vaccines will be here. We are dying left, right, and center, and we are desperate to hang on to anything that might help. So which one of these vaccines do you recommend that one should go for if it is available? There are people who have been saying that the RNA ones are the most likely to create problems in the future because they believe that it might change your DNA or whatever the case might be, and that they might develop antibodies that might start attacking healthy cells in the body, stuff like that. I don't know where the truth lies. So those are my three little questions.
Thank you, Dr. Mangan. Over to you, Comrade Monde.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Comrade Mangan. So, yes, thinking about the first question, ivermectin. I first came into contact with ivermectin information when I was still at Wits University, which is probably about 7 years, 8 years now. And there, it was a concern to us because it was killing the beetles that we were working on. We were working on dung beetles. Dung beetles, of course, they live in cow dung. Then they would eat the juice in the cow dung, and the cows would be treated for parasites using ivermectin. And that ivermectin then also killed the insects which we were interested in at the time. So I've known ivermectin as an anti-parasite, what you call a drug, really. So it's true what they're saying, that in South Africa it is licensed for veterinary use to treat parasites. But there has been small-scale studies overseas which show that it may have antiviral activity as well. So I do not have any reason to think that it can't have. I do not have. But the only thing is that you need to actually do the test. You must do the clinical trial to show that it does. Now, South Africa can allow the use of, even if we did not do the clinical trials ourselves. But if there was information, overseas information, perhaps that shows that through clinical trials, that they what called it's effective against what we call viruses, then it will be used. So the problem is that in South Africa, it is licensed only for veterinary use. So by law, they cannot allow it to be used for any other use. They would have to license it for clinical use, which is not the case. It is not licensed for clinical use. So they can't allow people to use it in South Africa for clinical use by law, unless they change the law. But to change the law, it means they must have the facts, and the facts must come from experimentation. So I think that's where the problem is in terms of ivermectin. In fact, I saw a more, what you call, a softer approach now from SAPRA about this, that they don't seem to reject ivermectin completely. So I think there's some way in which the medical fraternity believes that there may be something in ivermectin, but unfortunately the law does not allow its distribution. And then in terms of Black people dying disproportionately, yes, I do not have this information, Comrade Mang, and I remember last time we talked about it also, and I promised I would come back to you if I found it. Unfortunately, it's just not there. And that reflects, again, the agenda of our government. Because why is it not there? Even Americans are doing demographics when they analyze. But why are we not analyzing? And like I was saying earlier, for me, this is particularly critical to know, because what's happening in the Western Cape. There is no reason why the Western Cape should have a different death rate to that of Gauteng from what we are told. You know, about the Western Cape being a very advanced province and blah, blah, and all, resourced and everything is going smoothly there. But their death rate is double that of Gauteng. So it is important to know those demographics. It is important to know who is dying in the Western Cape, because that would reveal. In my view, I think COVID is Black people die because of skewness of what call of wealth. Basically, whenever Black people exist with white people, Black people die of COVID. And it's basically due of the skewness of resources. When this thing happened, you know, in America, when the COVID started, there was a very, what you call, annoying case on CNN of a Black woman who was a frontline worker who was refused testing. They wouldn't test her, even though she was a frontline, like, just, it was clear it was because she was Black. They were testing at the time in America was still new, so they were not able to do a lot of tests. So they would test white people mostly, and less black people. And then, of course, they would accuse the Black people of being fat when they die. You see what I mean? Whereas all the testing was basically done. So whenever Black people and white people coexist, COVID kills mostly the Black people. And that's probably because the resources are always directed towards the affluent and not. So if there was a ventilator, a choice of a ventilator, and you had to choose between Ntwasa and Fantonda, it's likely better to be preserved. And of course, in Africa, most African countries don't have that problem. People are what you call suffering together, you know, except for the corruption in some parts. So I think that is one of the things that is a problem where Black people seem to suffer more is the skewness. And I suspect this is the same thing in the Western Cape, that the majority of the deaths that are happening there that are causing the double death rate, the national average, is because the resources, there are people who are neglected and they are dying more unnecessarily. And then the one about the choice of the vaccine, the choice, I think that one is going to be largely dependent on your fear and trust, how fearful you are about survival, and your ability to take a risk, because both vaccines have got significant risks. First of all, no one is talking about telling us those people have already been vaccinated in these places that started, like Britain and others, because it would be nice to know what happens to them. You know, do they get protected in the first place? The other important thing about the vaccination thing is the information that we require. Does the vaccine kill the virus? No one is telling us that. Yes, they are saying that it's got neutralizing antibodies. Neutralizing meaning that it probably kills the virus, but it might also just inactivate it so that it is not infective to the person. So we need to know that the virus is not creating, it's because it may prevent a person from getting sick, let's say, but the person can remain a carrier of the virus. It's been published before, especially with the Oxford virus. When it was done in the mice, it was published that it actually, some of the mice protected them from from disease, from the pathology of the disease. But those mice, when the swabs were done on their nostrils, the PCR was positive. They tested positive for the virus, even though they did not get the disease. So you have the problem of a vaccine that can, yes, prevent you from getting this, but it then causes what call you to be an asymptomatic carrier. That is problematic, because it actually can have given the the cynical use of media and cynical use of information by politicians. I can expect that if that happened, if the virus, if the vaccine caused people to be asymptomatic carriers, then they would infect the people who are not vaccinated, and those people get sick. And then politicians would use that as a motivation to vaccinate everybody, to force everybody to be vaccinated, because you are dying if you are not vaccinated. You see what I mean? Without telling us you are dying because you are actually getting the infection from the vaccinated people. So it's important to know that people who get vaccinated do not become carriers. That information we do not know. That information we do not know, and no one is giving us. So it's very hard, comrade. I'm sorry, I cannot recommend any of them. The only thing I've cleared was that there are significant risks about both a vaccine. It's up to the person to decide what they want to do. But none of the vaccines, no one can claim any of them is safe and efficacious in the long term. No one can claim that.
The hesitancy or the unwillingness to release disaggregated demographic data is one of the strangest things to me. I do not quite understand it, because in South Africa, you apply for a job, you apply for an ID, whatever, you have to indicate. So as to why that reluctance, I do not quite understand it.
I don't know myself.
Yeah, they could easily collect that data. We already have the system and the sort of the mindset that would allow for it. But those types of things also feed into the cynicism that is related to our political system and the politicians. What are their intentions? What is it that they seek to achieve by doing such things? Comrade Joel and Comrade Mangena, both of them alluded to the fact that 3 hours ago, 1.5 million doses of the vaccine left India destined for South Africa and they are going to land tomorrow here. Should we celebrate this as the triumph of our political leadership?
Are you asking me? Are they asking me?
Yeah.
Or is this for discussion?
Yeah, I'm asking you for your comment. Yeah.
No, I'm not celebrating any of the vaccines as a victory. No.
Yeah, and one of the things that has come out is the fact that the distribution strategy, there's no clear distribution strategy that is there that has been communicated. The only thing that has been available to the public essentially is that there are three phases. First, the health workers and so for those who are compromised, essential workers, and then the general public. But as to how they are going to distribute it and so on, how are they going to refrigerate it? None of those plans have come about. We have a question from Mani on Facebook. He asked, I heard that there's a service providers that will be appointed to speed up the vaccination process. And my question is, what will happen if one reacts negatively to the vaccine? Who will be accountable? Do you perhaps know accountability when it comes to vaccines? Is it the producer, the manufacturer that is accountable?
Well, starting with the distribution thing, I think again for us, because you see a lot of these things, unfortunately in South Africa, political thought is always injected by the media, and then everybody flows with that, and then we do not look at things. I think from my point of view, we should also look at who is it that is complaining about distribution problems. And then ask the motivation for that. Because the first serious challenge to the distribution method was APRIFORUM. They even wanted to go to court to deal with that the government should not restrict on which vaccine or how the vaccine, or who should import the vaccine. They wanted freedom to import the vaccine. Now you can see, I mean, it's immediately interesting that APRIFORUM is taking that stance, because we know that we have got two economies here in this country. So it means white people, if the government is not restricting the acquisition of these things, white people can have a choice which vaccine they have and how they're going to give it. You see what I mean? So, and it was, I think that we should be asking questions about why is APRIFORUM particularly worried about distribution rather than distribution? Because I'm sure there are going to be problems about distribution. I'm sure there will be. As far as I know, they've already agreed that BioVac, which is already a known vaccine company, has been here for years, for decades in South Africa. It's based in Cape Town. It's going to be responsible for the vaccination, and that's probably because it's got the storage facilities and so on. Although the vaccine that's coming to South Africa is not like the other one, the Oxford one. This one can stay for a long time in the fridge, whereas the other one requires what we call very low temperatures, -80. So which means, you know, you would need it. In fact, it would not be about storage; it would be about transportation, because you would have to transport it in large, what we call containers at -80, which would be quite hard. But I mean, in terms of storage, once it's here, there's lots of storage for -80. So that is the problem. The distribution, I think, will be done by BioVac because of that. But the question now is, how will BioVac, from BioVac, how does it get to the patient? And that is where corruption is likely to arise, where tenders will come and stuff like that, the actual transportation and stuff like that. But no, that is South African normal activity. So South Africans will have to deal with it as they've always done with the others, or not done with others. And then the other question of accountability, I'm not quite sure in South Africa what the law says, but I know that in America, the FDA clearly stated that the company that produces a drug or a vaccine, because vaccines are also drugs, is not responsible really. It's already a disclaimer that they're not responsible for what happens to you if you have taken it. You know, after giving consent to take it, they will not be what you call. And of course, people will have consent to take the vaccine. They're not going to be forced. So if something happens to you, at least in America, the company that makes what call is not accountable. You are accountable because you make the decision to take it. Now, I don't know what the law says in South Africa.
Oh, okay.
We know about the FDA one because everybody who is in drug discovery bases what they do on what Americans say.
We will investigate that. Maybe we'll get someone who specializes in medical malpractice or something to look it up for us.
Investigate. Yeah, I think it's worth investigating.
Yeah, it's worth noting. Comrade Pat Muyaha asked, what is your attitude towards the use of African herbs to boost our immune system, like lingala?
To boost our immune system?
Yeah.
Or generally, African. Well, I think the important thing is to talk the attitude of West to our science. I think we're being done a disservice really by our leadership. You know, my view is that leadership in the whole continent is asleep. We've been totally conquered in the mind, and with gaslighting that has been happening over centuries. We don't even know that we are conquered. We've come to even defend the enemy. And it's not just Black people in South Africa, it's Black people globally. You know, in South Africa, of course, everybody knows. If you said white people were racist in general, there are lots of Black people who would come first and say, oh, but Black people can also be racist. I mean, that is a serious example of someone whose mind has been conquered and who has been gaslit completely. So we have that problem, basically, because there is what you call not a single drug that exists on Earth that has not been taken from natural resources. The majority of the drugs, even I, who is in this business of developing drugs, we know that the drugs that we use eventually have come from some natural resource. Of course, there are some of those that you do what you call synthetically completely, but there are very, very few. I'll take the example of the Madagascan thing, Artemisia, umhlonyane lo. Really, there is no reason why that drug, what called medicine should have been rejected outright, even by Africans, and of course South Africans, because the other Africans did not reject it like we did. But there was no reason whatsoever, because there are so many medications that you can go and buy in the supermarkets here, Discam or whatever, Clicks, whatever, which have never gone through a process of clinical trials, but have gone through a process of clinical observation. You see what I mean? And the preparation in Madagascar was a very advanced preparation. It is patented, it has got science behind it, but it was rejected because it came from Madagascar. And it was a political, what you call rejection, really. There was nothing else. And there is scientific reason to believe that that drug could, what you call, not perhaps against what you call COVID itself, but definitely against fever. And we must know that part of the reasons, the pathology of COVID is clotting of the blood. disseminated clotting, where the blood coagulation happens systemically throughout the body. And the active ingredient in umhlonyane actually deals with that kind of thing, anti-fever, directly. The mechanism of action, it deals directly with clotting of blood. So there is not a strong reason to reject what we call umhlonyane outright. Definitely not. But it was rejected, and no one talks about it. Nobody even gave it a chance of saying, let us try it. Everybody knows it doesn't kill people, so it's not toxic. People have taken it and they did not die. So that one, for sure, it has passed phase 1 clinical trials. You see what I mean? The only thing we don't know is efficacy. So you know what I mean? So it could have been tried, really. So I think more we should be talking more not about a specific thing up against immunity or anything. We should be talking about generally the attitude of the Western music and its relationship with our African science. It's problematic. There were problems initially, long time ago, where people felt that the interventions by traditional, I hate the word traditional, by our African doctors against HIV, that it was bogus nonsense, that they were not able to treat what we call HIV. But now, if you go to the University of KwaZulu-Natal, both what we call our doctors and what we call the Western doctors, scientists, are working together because they've realized that actually there is a certain level of truth that the African what we call medicines work against HIV. They acknowledge that now. Of course, it's now in small quarters. I only found that when I went there for a different mission to look at. Then we found that actually these people are working together now on HIV, because they found that HIV, sometimes the medicines in Africans are more successful than the ones that are offered by the West. So it's really about the relationship that indigenous knowledge has with so-called Western knowledge. It's not about specifically against immunity or anything like that. Generally, it's the relationship that our knowledge has compared to what so-called Western knowledge is about. That is what needs to be changed.
Yeah.
But then before that, our minds need to change first.
Fully agree. I am a big fan of the Chinese system where you get both Western treatment and
yes, I mean the Chinese don't play games. The Chinese, they've got their own, they even have their own journals. I mean, our science, unfortunately, does not get developed because it's put in the background. The Chinese don't do that. Their science is they even have their own journals where they publish Chinese medicine. They don't, because they've got the power. They've got real power. We don't have real power, even though we seem to be free, but we don't have real power. Are you still there? They seem to be all mute now.
At least I'm not mute.
So what's happened? Comrade Mangen, are you sure you didn't sabotage the comrade?
Anyway, there is a problem with him, I suspect.
Yeah, I think so.
In any case, the time has elapsed. I will leave now.
Maybe that is the reason.
Yeah.
It could be the reason that we've been cut off, because the time, it's now almost 3 hours, really.
Anyway, it was great. I'm leaving now. We'll talk separately elsewhere.
Thank you, comrade. I'm glad you came.